Picture the bass vibrating right through the soles of your combat boots. You're standing at the edge of an illegal psychomusic rave on the planet Shinju.
Oh yeah, absolute sensory nightmare.
Right, like the neon strobes are blinding, the crowd is just this surging sea of panicked civilians, and the music is an actual physical pressure against your chest. And your strike team is supposed to somehow wade into this chaos to extract critical intelligence.
Yeah, it's not a sterile military facility.
Exactly. You aren't just fighting an elite enemy kill team across the dance floor. You're fighting the environment itself. The battlefield is, it's fundamentally unstable, shifting and convulsing with every pulse of the track.
It is the absolute definition of spatial volatility. I mean, usually when we look at securing an objective in a tabletop skirmish game, players rely on, well, a sense of territorial permanence.
Right, you lock it down.
Yeah, you march your heavy infantry up to a control console, you plant your feet, establish intersecting fire lanes, and you claim that piece of the board. It's binary. You lock down the perimeter, and the perimeter stays locked down.
But when you step into a narrative campaign where the map is like actively hostile to your planning, that solid concrete foundation just turns to quicksand. The geometry of the game actively punishes static play.
Which forces a radical reevaluation of standard tactical doctrine. You just can't play it the normal way.
Welcome to the deep dive. Whether you are prepping your roster for your next tabletop match, catching up on the competitive scene, or you're just insanely curious about the game theory behind complex tactical puzzles, this deep dive is tailored specifically for you.
We've got a lot to get through today.
We really do. We have a massive stack of fresh intelligence, and our mission today is highly specific. We are extracting the absolute most critical tactical nuggets from the brand new Infinity narrative mission, Raid the Kazereibu. This is the kickoff, week 1 of the Monday Signal campaign.
And that thematic backdrop you just described, it isn't just flavor text. The mechanics of the mission perfectly map to that feeling of a chaotic, claustrophobic rave.
It really translates to the table.
It does. But before we get into the granular breakdown of those mechanics, we really need to establish our baseline for this analysis.
Right, so for this deep dive, we are assuming you are already familiar with the foundational rules of Infinity. We're skipping the basic tutorials. We know you understand how the order pool works, how automatic reaction orders your AROs trigger, how line of fire is drawn, and the basic principles of hacking and camouflage.
Our focus is entirely on how this specific mission recombines those familiar systems into a highly volatile strategic puzzle. And we need to be transparent about where this intelligence is coming from, too.
Yeah, because this is brand new.
Exactly. Raid the Kazereibu is a live, brand new narrative campaign mission. There is no mature competitive meta yet. We don't have thousands of tournament data points to fall back on to see what statistically wins.
So nobody has mathematically solved the rave yet. We are on the bleeding edge of the campaign. The insights we're unpacking today represent a preliminary first read. This is a tactical briefing meant to make you more prepared and more curious when you approach the table for the first time.
You're going to have to test these theories in actual games under fire.
For sure. Okay, let's unpack this. We are applying rigorous analytical frameworks to fresh data, but we're not claiming settled doctrine. And the framework we're using to decode this stack of sources is the IMEM-17 lens.
Right, the Infinity Mission Evaluation Model for the ITS-17 era.
I've been reviewing the documentation you brought on this, and I kind of want to start by challenging the premise.
Okay, go for it.
I'm looking at a mission defined by random objective generation and drifting smoke clouds. How does applying a rigid academic model like IMEM-17 actually help a player survive a game that relies so heavily on unpredictable dice rolls?
That's a fair question, but it's exactly because the mission appears so chaotic on the surface that you need a structured way to understand the underlying pressures. IMEM-17 doesn't predict the dice rolls.
Right, obviously.
It evaluates the burden those mechanics place on your resources. It looks at 2 primary factors. First, burden intensity, which is measuring the sheer amount of pressure the mission creates. And second, burden type, identifying the specific architecture creating that pressure.
So instead of just looking at it and saying, this mission is hard, The model specifies that, well, this mission drains your action economy, or this mission stresses your lateral mobility.
Precisely. And for Raid the Kazereibu, our preliminary evaluation highlights a few terrifyingly specific core metrics. The first one is order burden.
Ah, the action economy.
Right. In Infinity, your orders are your most precious resource. Every time you move, shoot, or dodge, you spend an order. This mission demands that specialists, your hackers, doctors, engineers, forward observers, they must physically reach the objective targets and get into silhouette contact with them.
Base-to-base contact, like you have to walk right up and literally touch the civilian on the dance floor.
But the architecture of the mission means the objective map changes over time. You're spending your most precious resource to move fragile specialists toward targets that might literally vanish before you can fully exploit them. The order drain is immense.
Which feeds directly into the second IMEM-17 metric identified in the sources, right? Parallel burden pressure, which honestly sounds like a psychological diagnosis for a tabletop gamer who's sweating over the table.
It practically is a diagnosis, yeah.
Yeah.
Parallel burden pressure measures how many different plates you have to keep spinning simultaneously. Think about the cognitive load here.
Oh, that's brutal.
You're trying to manage your fragile specialists to push buttons. You're managing massive, drifting eclipse zones that block your visibility. You're trying to set up lethal ARO traps to deny the opponent their scoring. And critically, you are trying to preserve enough heavy, expensive units for an endgame victory point convergence.
Right, so if you build a list that is hyper-optimized for pushing buttons early, but it shatters the moment a heavy machine gun looks at it, you fail the parallel burden test because you literally can't survive the endgame.
Exactly. The late game swing potential here is massive. The scoring weights really heavily toward the final round. If your round 1 decisions aren't actively setting up your round 3 board state, you will lose, regardless of how well you start.
Yeah. So the sources identify a signature demand that creates all of this pressure, and they call it adaptive objective compression. And I'm trying to picture this on the table. You start the game, and there are 5 neutral ravers scattered across the board.
Yeah, 5 physical civilian models.
1 dead center, 2 pushed out on your side of the midfield, 2 on your opponent's side. But you aren't fighting over all 5 of them.
No, they start as potential sites. They're just the crowd, essentially.
Right. During round 1, and again in round 2, you randomly designate just 2 of those 5 ravers as the actual intel carriers for that specific round. You roll the dice, and suddenly those 2 specific civilians are the only things that matter.
And you spend all your orders fighting over them, you score them.
And then at the end of the round, those 2 scored intel carriers are completely removed from the table. They just vanish back into the surging crowd.
Which fundamentally shrinks the geometry of the game.
Yes. By the time you hit round 3, 4 of the original 5 ravers are just gone. The game collapses onto a single last intel carrier. It's like a tactical game of musical chairs played in the dark.
That's a great way to put it.
You have to spread your coverage early because you have no idea which of the 5 chairs is going to be active. But the chairs keep disappearing. So you are forced to constantly reevaluate your spatial positioning and spend orders just walking across the board to chase the active targets.
And that adaptive throughput burden completely shatters static playstyles. Think about a standard deployment. You might find a really dominant sniper tower looking down a massive fire lane that watches the central objective.
Sure, you put a highly lethal piece there and force the opponent to walk into your crosshairs.
But if you do that here and commit your entire defensive network to the center lane, the active intel carriers might randomly pop up on the extreme left and right flanks.
And your sniper is just staring at an empty patch of dance floor while the enemy scores for free.
Exactly. And even if you do lock down an active objective, your dominance is temporary. It gets removed at the end of the round. You cannot pour concrete. You can't establish a permanent stronghold because the stronghold deletes itself.
But, knowing where these zones are going to be, or even accepting that they will change, it doesn't matter if your units don't have the right loadout to actually extract the data.
Right. You need the right tools.
We need to dissect the actual scoring mechanics, which completely changes the math on how we evaluate our specialists. The mission packet outlines a highly specific 3-layered scoring puzzle: scan, secure, and dominate.
Let's take this sequentially, starting with layer 1, which the IMEM-17 model calls the score floor. This is the scan action.
This is the bread and butter of the early game. This is the foot race.
Yeah. To scan an intel carrier, you must use a specialist trooper. That specialist has to navigate the hazards of the board, get into silhouette contact with the active intel carrier, and spend a short skill with the attack and scenario labels.
Right.
Then they must pass a normal whippy roll, a willpower roll.
And willpower stats vary wildly across factions and units.
Yeah.
Like a basic line trooper might have a whippy of 12 or 13. A dedicated elite hacker might have a whippy of 15.
Which is a huge difference.
That 2-point difference is massive when you are rolling a 20-sided die.
Yeah.
Because failing that roll means you just wasted an entire order. You have to spend another order to try the scan again, which drains your action economy even further.
And if they succeed, you score 1 objective point. You can score up to 5 objective points total across the game just through scanning. It's half of the entire mission's point value.
I was reading through the source packet, and I realized there is a massive detail buried in the rules for this scan action. Scanning is not zero-sum.
Yeah, it is a profound departure from typical objective room mechanics.
In a lot of tabletop scenarios, if there is a computer terminal and my specialist slices it first, I lock you out. I get the point, you get 0. It's a binary race.
Right.
But here, both players can successfully scan the exact same intel carrier independently. Me scanning the Raver on my active turn does not prevent you from walking up on your turn and scanning that exact same Raver. We could both get our point.
Which completely shifts the defensive paradigm. You can't rely on speed as a defensive measure.
Yeah, I was thinking about how to physically stop a scan then. If getting there first doesn't deny the opponent, how do I stop them? I can't just sprint a fast unit up, touch the Raver and say, aha, I got it, you can't have it. Because your specialist will just walk up, shoot my guy in the back, and scan it too.
You have to deny the oxygen in the room around the objective.
You have to make the route so incredibly lethal that the opponent's specialist literally cannot survive the trip.
Exactly.
You have to kill them on the way in, or kill them the precise moment they declare the move to touch the objective. You need overlapping AROs, you need deployable weapons like mines, you need to physically body block the approach with an expendable unit.
This creates a fascinating tension on the table. The scan layer rewards high throughput, getting your own fragile specialists in efficiently, while simultaneously demanding lethal area denial to stop the opponent.
Scalpels and sledgehammers.
Right, you're bringing scalpels to do the scanning, but you need sledgehammers to protect the space around them. But that is only layer 1. The pressure compounds when we look at layer 2, which is secure.
This is where the game shifts from an action economy puzzle into a territorial puzzle. And the timing is everything.
Securing an intel carrier is all about end-of-round local control. At the end of each game round, an intel carrier is considered secured by a player if that player has at least one friendly trooper inside the intel carrier's zone of control.
Which is an 8-inch radius bubble around the model.
Right, an 8-inch radius. And critically, there must be 0 opposing troopers inside that same bubble.
So you have to be there, and they have to explicitly not be there. It's uncontested presence.
Yep. If you achieve this at the end of the round, you score 1 objective point. You can do this in round 1, round 2, and round 3 for a maximum of 3 objective points across the game.
The fact that this check happens at the end of the round is what makes it so stressful. The sources talk about timing asymmetry pressure. The player who goes second in the turn order of player 2 has a massive structural advantage for this specific layer.
It is the scoring window agency. The last activation before the buzzer goes off dictates the score.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's play this out. I'm going first. I spend my entire active turn perfectly positioning a trooper next to the active intel carrier. I use my heavy machine gun to sweep the area. I clear out all your visible models from the 8-inch bubble.
A perfect setup.
Right. I set up a great defensive perimeter. I pass the turn to you, feeling great about my board state. But I don't score yet. You now have an entire pool of orders to dismantle my setup.
I don't even have to kill your model.
Exactly. You just have to spend a couple of orders to walk a single, cheap, 5-point line trooper into the very edge of that 8-inch zone of control. Now the zone is contested. Suddenly, my perfect setup yields 0 points.
Or, conversely, player 2 can wait until their very last order of the round. They walk a unit up to the edge of the zone, drop a direct template weapon like a chain rifle to wipe out your contesting model without needing to roll to hit, and claim the uncontested presence for themselves with absolutely no opportunity for you to respond before the round ends.
The second player's last activation is a terrifying weapon. But there is a major caveat buried in the rules for the secure layer that prevents player 2 from just running away with the game. You can only score a maximum of 1 secure point per round, period.
Even though there are 2 active intel carriers in rounds 1 and 2?
Right. If I am completely dominating the board, and I manage to uncontestedly control the zone of control for both active intel carriers at the end of round 1, I still only get one objective point.
The game caps your momentum.
I can't double dip on the secure points just because I had a great first turn.
The psychological effect of that cap is significant. It discourages players from overcommitting to total board dominance early on because the return on investment diminishes instantly. However, the sources clarify the feel side of that rule. Both players can score a secure point in the exact same round, provided they control different intel carriers.
So if I lock down the carrier on the left flank and you lock down the carrier on the right flank, we both get a point at the end of the round. The game's architecture is actively encouraging a split focus.
It forces you to divide your resources.
It doesn't want you throwing your entire army into a single massive brawl in the center. It wants you fighting multiple, isolated, desperate skirmishes across the Rave.
It's that parallel burden pressure manifesting physically on the table. You have to split your attention, your orders, and your firepower. But the mission won't let you stay split forever. Eventually, the game forces a violent convergence. And that brings us to layer 3, dominate.
The final pivot. Round 3. By the time we reach the final round, 4 of the 5 original Ravers have vanished into the crowd. There is only one left, the last intel carrier. And the scoring condition fundamentally changes. We are still checking at the end of the round, but we aren't just looking for uncontested presence anymore.
Dominate the last intel carrier is a separate scoring vector worth 2 objective points. And to win those points, you don't just need a model in the zone of control. You need to have the most victory points physically located inside that final 8-inch bubble.
This is a radical shift in the strategic math. For the secure layer in rounds 1 and 2, a 5-point war core, basically a civilian journalist with a flash pulse, is perfectly capable of standing in a zone and contesting it.
Right.
A cheap model is just as effective as an expensive model for creating contested presence.
But for dominate, that 5-point model is bringing a knife to a tank fight?
I'm trying to visualize this progression. It's like the mission is forcing you to shift sports entirely in the middle of a match. Rounds 1 and 2 feel like a foot race.
Yes, exactly.
You need fast, efficient specialists to sprint up and push the buttons for the scan points. You're using cheap, fast units to quickly dart into zones of control to grab those end-of-round secure points. It's all about speed, efficiency, and stretching your action economy.
You're covering ground and playing the margins?
But then, round 3 hits, the map shrinks down to one single point.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the foot race is over. Now, it is a sumo match. You need massive, heavy, expensive units to just slam their bulk into the center of the ring and refuse to be moved.
Yeah.
If you built a track team for rounds 1 and 2, they're going to get completely crushed by the sumo wrestlers in round 3.
Your analogy perfectly highlights the core tension of list building for this mission. If you have 3 cheap skirmishers in the final zone worth 30 points total, and your opponent walks a single heavily armored tag, a tactical armored gear worth 80 points into that exact same zone, they dominate it.
Just by standing there.
Yep. They win those 2 objective points because 80 is greater than 30.
But wait, let me challenge that. If I bring an 80-point tag just to sit in a zone in round 3 and win the sumo match, aren't I starving my action economy in rounds 1 and 2? I'm basically playing down 80 points for the foot race portion of the game. How is that trade-off worth it?
That is the exact trap many players will fall into. You are absolutely starving yourself if that tag just hides in your deployment zone for 2 rounds.
It has to do something.
Right. The units you bring for victory point density in round 3 must pull double duty in rounds 1 and 2. That 80-point tag can't just be a sumo wrestler. It has to be the sledgehammer that protects your fragile specialists while they scan. It has to actively dismantle the opponent's ARO pieces. The real trick is keeping it alive while it does that work, so it has the mass left to dominate the final zone.
And the end of round 3 is a massive scoring convergence. You could be fighting for the final scan point, the round 3 secure point, and the 2-point dominate check, all at the exact same location, at the exact same time.
All on that one Raver.
That one final Raver could be worth 4 objective points in a single round. In a 10-point game, the late game swing is terrifying.
You have to execute this complex, shifting, 3-stage scoring plan, coordinating your fragile specialists, managing your 8-inch zones of control, preserving your heavy hitters for the round 3 convergence, all while the environment itself is actively trying to blind you.
Oh, man. Right. I want you to picture trying to coordinate this elegant, layered strategy. You have your hacker perfectly positioned to sprint to the Raver. Your heavy infantry is providing cover fire. You've mathematically calculated your order expenditure. And then suddenly, a massive cloud of sensory distortion drifts directly across your line of sight, completely severing your strike team's visual connection.
We absolutely must address the mechanics of volatility. The IM-17 model flags 3 specific environmental hazards that spike the parallel burden pressure: the eclipse zones, the marker states, and the civivac rules. Let's start with the eclipse zones. The sources describe these as spatial weather.
Before deployment even begins, each player places 2 permanent eclipse zones outside the deployment zones.
Yeah.
These are massive. They are 120-millimeter circular templates. For reference, that's almost 5 inches across. And there are 4 of them on the board.
An eclipse is a very specific keyword in Infinity. It is not just regular smoke. It represents total sensory blackout. It completely blocks line of sight. And critically, it blocks multispectral visors.
Which normally shoot through smoke.
Exactly. But you cannot shoot through eclipse. You cannot see through it. It completely severs lines of interaction.
Which is already a huge deal for shaping the battlefield. You can use these zones during deployment to completely shut down a long-range sniper tower before the game even starts. You can build artificial walls to create safe corridors for your own troops to advance.
And if they stayed still, they would be powerful, predictable, tactical tools. But they drift.
At the start of rounds 2 and 3, every single one of these 4 massive eclipse zones moves. And the mechanics for this drift are specific and chaotic. You take a 12-centimeter scatter template, which has 10 directional arrows on it. You line the point 1 arrow directly toward the center of the board. Then you roll a 20-sided die.
And the zone moves a massive 8 inches in whatever direction the die tells it to go.
8 inches. 8 inches is a tremendous distance in Infinity. It is a full movement action for many of the fastest units in the game. An entire building could be engulfed or suddenly revealed.
The tactical fallout of this drift is immense. This is why the sources call it spatial weather. It completely disrupts your cognitive map of the board state. Let's say you perfectly positioned a missile launcher to watch the main approach to an active intel carrier.
A great ARO setup.
You're relying on that ARO to keep the opponent's specialist away. At the start of round 2, an eclipse zone rolls an 8 and drifts directly over your missile launcher, blinding them completely. Your carefully laid defensive network evaporates without the opponent firing a single shot.
But the reverse is just as terrifying. Let's say I was using an eclipse zone to hide my own specialist. I marched them up the board, and I left them tucked behind this 5-inch wall of distortion. I think they are perfectly safe.
And then the wind blows.
The turn starts, the zone scatters 8 inches to the left, and suddenly my specialist is standing wide out in the open, completely exposed to the entire enemy gun line.
It forces a constant state of reevaluation. It also heavily impacts discover actions. If you are trying to reveal enemy camouflage markers, you need uninterrupted line of sight. If the weather drifts and cuts off your visibility, you might lose the ability to clear out a contesting piece before the end of the round.
You can try to use the eclipse zones strategically, like trying to guide them toward the center of the board during placement to create chaos. But ultimately, you are relying on a zone that will randomly scatter. You cannot anchor your game plan to it. It is an opportunistic tool, not a structural foundation.
You mentioned camouflage markers, which leads us directly into the second massive point of volatility in this mission: the ghost contesters.
This is a huge rule interpretation that we need to unpack because the level of paranoia this introduces is staggering.
According to the sources, there is a specific working read on how marker state troopers interact with the secure scoring layer. Marker states include things like camouflage tokens or impersonation markers models that are hidden on the table, represented only by a generic token and haven't been revealed as physical miniatures yet.
Right. And the core rule for securing an intel carrier states that you need a trooper in the zone of control and no opposing troopers.
And because the rule specifically uses the word troopers and does not explicitly exclude markers, the working interpretation for this event is that marker state troopers absolutely count for securing and contesting that 8-inch bubble.
The end of round state becomes a psychological thriller. Let me walk through a nightmare scenario.
Oh, please do.
It is the bottom of round 2. I have the last activation. I have spent my turn meticulously clearing out all the visible enemy models from the 8-inch zone of control around the intel carrier. I walk my own line trooper in. I look at the board, I check the distances, and I think, perfect. Uncontested presence. I have secured the objective. I get my point.
But you missed something.
There is an enemy camouflage token sitting exactly 7.5 inches away from the Raver, hiding on a rooftop behind a parapet. I didn't shoot it because I couldn't see it to declare an attack, and I didn't have the orders left to attempt a discover action, pass the whippy roll, reveal it, and then shoot it. Because that hidden token represents a trooper, it counts as an opposing presence in the zone.
It silently invalidates your point.
It is a ghost contesting my control. I might think I own the dance floor, but there is someone hiding in the rafters, completely ruining my score.
Uh,
Wait, let me take this a step further. Does a mine count? If you drop a mine in the zone, is that a trooper?
No, the rules distinguish between deployable weapons and troopers. A mine token would not contest the zone for the secure check. However, a camouflage token could be a mine, or it could be a deadly skirmisher.
So I have to guess. I have to look at a token 7 inches away and decide if I need to spend 3 orders dealing with it, or if it's just a piece of explosive trash that won't affect my score.
This elevates the value of specific support pieces immensely. If markers can deny your end-of-round scoring, you absolutely must bring tools to reveal them efficiently. The IM-17 analysis highlights sensor and discover support as crucial for this mission.
Sensor is huge here.
Yeah, a unit with the sensor skill can sweep a massive area and strip away those marker states without needing line of sight, forcing the ghosts to materialize. If you don't bring sensor, you will lose the secure layer to invisible enemies.
It's brilliant, incredibly tense game design. But we aren't done with the volatility yet. There is one more wild card we have to talk about. The sources introduced a portmanteau specifically for this mission, CivEvac. It stands for Civilian Evacuation.
This raises a profound question about the physical nature of the objectives on the table. In most standard missions, objectives are computer terminals, antennas, or supply boxes. They are bolted to the floor. In Raid the Kazereibu, the intel carriers are ravers.
They are actual people panicking at a rave,
Mechanically, within the Infinity rule set, ravers are classified as civilians.
which triggers a very specific set of core rules.
It does. It means the rules likely permit that players can civ-evac them.
I read this and my jaw dropped. You can potentially move a unit up to a raver, spend a short skill to civ-evac them, and physically drag the objective across the board with you.
You can effectively kidnap the VIP from the dance floor and pull them back into your own lines.
The geometry of the board completely breaks down if you do this. You aren't just fighting over static points on a map anymore. Let's say the active intel carrier is out in the open. I run my fast skirmisher up, civ-evac the raver, and spend my remaining orders to walk 4 inches back into a heavy reinforced building with only one door.
You just move the goalposts.
I just took the objective off the dance floor and put it in a bunker. I've made it infinitely harder for the opponent to scan or secure it because now they have to breach a building just to get base-to-base contact.
It is an incredibly powerful tactical option. However, the sources issue a massive blinking red light warning regarding this mechanic.
And it comes down to tabletop etiquette.
Exactly. The expert advice here is unequivocal. You must clarify this interaction with your opponent before the first die is rolled. This is a narrative campaign. You are there to tell a compelling story and test your tactical acumen against another person.
You do not want to spring a surprise kidnapping on your opponent in the middle of round 2. If they spend an hour planning their approach based on the assumption that the objectives are static and you suddenly walk away with the objective, you aren't outsmarting them. You are just exploiting a mismatched expectation of the rules.
So say, hey, my reading of the rules says these are civilians and I can civ-evac them. Do we agree on that interpretation for this game? Settle it during deployment. The same goes for how null state models interact with scoring.
Null state meaning unconscious models.
Right. If a trooper is shot and falls unconscious, they are still physically on the table. Do they count for uncontested presence? The default recommendation from the sources is that an unconscious model shouldn't count for securing a zone, but again, clarify the pre-game contract.
Get it in writing, basically.
Do not rely on a gotcha rules interpretation mid-game. A pre-game contract prevents mid-game friction.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We have outlined a 3-stage scoring system that brutally shifts from fast, action-efficient button pushing into heavy, expensive point brawling. We have an objective map that randomly activates and then deletes itself. We have massive 5-inch drifting clouds of blindness, invisible enemies silently contesting our zones, and the genuine possibility that the objectives themselves might grow legs and walk away.
It is a phenomenal amount of pressure on the player.
So how do we actually put models on the table to survive this? Let's move into the final piece of the IM-17 analysis, which is list-building strategies for the Kazureibu.
The strategic thesis of this mission boils down to balancing two extremes. We discussed this with the foot race versus the sumo match analogy. A player must balance specialist throughput, the speed and efficiency to score early with victory point density, the mass and durability to dominate late.
You need both. You cannot skew too far in either direction. Let's look at the archetypes that the sources explicitly warn against. What kinds of lists are going to walk into this rave and get completely dismantled?
First on the chopping block are pure gun lines.
The classic sniper cast.
Right. If you build a list designed to sit back in your deployment zone, establish massive overlapping fire lanes, and just shoot everything that moves, you are going to lose the mission. You might kill a lot of the enemy army, but you will not have the specialist throughput to physically push into the midfield and get those scan points.
And remember, the eclipse zones are going to drift and sever your fire lanes anyway. You can't shoot what you can't see.
Another archetype the sources warn against is the slow brick.
Okay, what's a slow brick?
This is a list that brings a highly durable, tightly packed team of heavy infantry. They're tough, they have great armor, but they lack lateral mobility. They move slowly.
And the problem with the slow brick is the adaptive objective compression. You don't know which of the 5 Ravers is going to become an intel carrier in round 1. If you deploy your slow brick on the right flank, and the dice determine that the active objectives are on the far left flank, you are in trouble.
You simply won't have the action economy, the orders to march a slow, heavy team all the way across the board in time to matter. You are effectively out of the game before it starts.
And on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you want to avoid cheap spam.
The dedicated track team.
Yeah. If you bring 15 extremely fast, extremely cheap, fragile units, you will likely dominate rounds 1 and 2. You have the action economy to sprint everywhere. You will get every scan point. You will swarm the zones and grab the early secure points. But then round 3 arrives.
The sumo match begins.
The last intel carrier demands victory point density. If your entire army is made of cheap skirmishers, a single heavy enemy unit will walk into the final zone, flex its 80-point cost, and steal the 2-point dominate check right out from under you. You have to preserve endgame mass. You need weight.
The sources also specifically call out tag-centric lists that forget to bring a diverse portfolio of specialists. You can bring the biggest, most expensive walking tank in the game, but if you don't bring the hackers, doctors, or engineers to actually pass the WIP roll and scam the intel carriers, your tank is just a massive, expensive bodyguard for a button nobody is pressing.
Those are the list-building traps. So what does the ideal toolkit actually look like? Based on the IMEM-17 analysis, there are a few MVP profiles you want to actively seek out in your faction's roster.
The first one is infiltrating or forward-deployed specialists.
This directly mitigates the order burden. If your specialist starts the game in your own deployment zone, you have to spend 3 or 4 precious orders just walking them up to the midfield before they can even attempt to scan.
That's half your turn just commuting to the job site. But if they have the infiltration skill, they deploy on the board already in the midfield, they might be one short sprint away from an intel carrier. The order efficiency is massive.
You spend 1 order to move into silhouette contact, 1 order to scan, and you still have your whole pool left to set up defenses.
Next on the MVP list are marker state contesters. We spent a lot of time talking about the paranoia of the ghost contesters. You want to be the player causing that paranoia, not the one suffering from it.
Absolutely. Bring camouflage markers. Even if they aren't specialists, a cheap camo token parked 7 inches away from an objective is a nightmare for your opponent to deal with at the end of the round.
Yeah.
You are forcing them to waste their orders discovering and shooting it, or else they forfeit their secure point. It is incredibly efficient resource drain.
And of course, you need those durable VP anchors.
The sumo wrestlers.
You need a heavy infantry piece, a highly resilient fire team, or a tag specifically preserved for the round 3 convergence. As we discussed, they can't just hide, but you must shepherd their wounds. You want to manage their risk so they can drop their massive points value onto that last intel carrier at the end of the game.
The sources also highlight passive area denial tools as absolutely essential.
My passive.
Because remember, the non-zero-sum nature of the scan action. To stop the opponent from scoring, you have to make the route lethal. Passive area denial tools do exactly that without draining your active turn orders. We are talking about mines, perimeter weapons like crazy koalas that automatically run at enemies, hacking areas established by deployable repeaters, and models set up in suppressive fire.
You want to lace the approaches to the intel carriers with passive threats that bleed your opponent's orders and make every single inch of ground cost blood.
Which brings us to the final tactical phase, deployment. How do you physically place this carefully constructed toolkit on the table? The sources refer to the ideal strategy here as the broad web.
Which makes perfect sense when you remember the adaptive objective compression. You have 5 neutral ravers on the board at the start of the game. You do not know which ones will activate in round 1.
So your deployment geometry cannot focus heavily on a single lane.
Exactly. If you deploy your forces tightly packed on the right side of the board and the objectives activate on the left, you've essentially given away the first round. You don't have the speed to pivot. A strong deployment requires a web.
You need a contingency plan for the center raver. You need localized plans for the side lanes. You need lateral flex, meaning you need fast, adaptable units deployed near the center line that can quickly pivot left or right, depending on the dice roll.
The sources use a very specific, punishing term for a failure in this area, calling them dead objectives.
That phrase stood out to me. A dead objective is a raver that your list literally cannot reach if it randomly becomes an intel carrier. If you deploy so poorly or build a list so slow that an objective activates on turn one and you look at the board and just have to shrug and say, well, I guess the opponent gets that one for free because I can't mathematically walk there, you have already lost the tactical layer of the mission. You must have reached across the entire web.
So, to synthesize the concrete advice for a player getting ready to drop into Shinju, bring redundant specialists so you can guarantee throughput even if one dies. Cover multiple raver lanes during deployment so you aren't caught flat-footed by the randomness. Respect the psychological power of camo tokens to contest stones.
Treat the drifting eclipse zones as opportunistic cover, but never base your structural strategy on them staying still.
Bring sensor to clear out the ghosts.
And, above all, preserve enough points to win the final, brutal sumo match over the last intel carrier in round 3.
It is a beautifully designed, highly demanding mission. It tests adaptability above all else. You must embrace the chaos, leverage hidden presence, and perfectly time the transition from fast early-game button pushing to late-game VP brawling.
And let's reiterate that final practical reminder. Before the dice are even rolled, have a conversation with your opponent, clarify the edge cases, establish the pregame contract regarding civac and null state scoring so that both of you can focus on the incredible tactical puzzle in front of you.
The game is hard enough without fighting over rules interpretations.
Exactly. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing the cold, hard mechanics of the IMEM-17 model. We've talked about maximizing victory point density, managing zones of control, and calculating whippy rolls. But I want to circle back to the narrative hook we opened with.
The illegal psycho music rave on Shinju.
Think about what the scoring mechanics of this mission are actually incentivizing you to do. The rules heavily dictate that if you want to win, you must bring incredibly expensive, massive, lethal units, tags, heavy infantry, literal walking tanks to dominate the final raver through sheer mass.
You are forced to deploy heavy military hardware directly into a civilian space.
How does that affect the ongoing lore of the Ruby Monday campaign? If, week after week, players across the globe succeed in this mission not through stealthy surgical extractions of intelligence by covert operatives, but by deploying walking tanks into crowded civilian raid spaces just to occupy an 8-inch zone and bully out the opposition, does the meta-narrative inevitably shift?
It's a fascinating example of emergent narrative. The tactics you use to win the game dictate the story the campaign tells on a global scale.
Does Raid the Kazereibu stop being a covert raid and mathematically devolve into a brutal, high-collateral military occupation of a dance floor? So the question isn't just how you are going to solve the tactical puzzle. The question is, what kind of story are you going to tell on the table? Are you going to bring the scalpel, or are you going to drop a tank on the dance floor? Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Good luck out there in the Kazureibu, and we will see you next time.